your influence are not working today. You have touched upon a very important topic, electricity. What is electricity today? This is the foundation of not only economy. This is the foundation for the development of a new phenomenon, as such new phenomenon as artificial intelligence. AI is not only formulas. First of all, AI is electricity. If you do not have electricity, you will not be able to be at the very top of artificial intelligence development. And that's why artificial intelligence is the future. And there are only a few countries who will be able to afford artificial intelligence. There will be the rest will be consumers, but those who will own artificial intelligence will have the upper hand, and they will have to have resources and capacity to process data. They will have to have electricity and everything else. And if you look at China and Russia, Russia has a huge upside potential. But as long as you are looking at the US and China, the US will have to put 67 gigawatt of generation capacity put on stream this year, and China will put 480 gigawatt of generation capacity into operation. And if not today, after some time, it is not the question of capacity, but that opens up new technological opportunities. And if you try to fight with China by imposing constraints, we will not supply you with chips, you are not allowed to trade with that party or with that country, such restrictions are not working, because globalization has created other ties and connections that are non-destructible. And today, the United States will lose if they apply old methods. But if new methods are applied, the United States may maintain its influence, but you will have to fight for that.
You know, it looks like the United States is captive to a stereotype about Russia and China.
Yes.
That is, predicated on they're godless communists. They have no innovation. Everything they have to steal from someone else. And they really need us. That China and Russia can't get by without us. And yet, you've seen that all of that is false.
Well, it's the exceptionalist mentality. No? You live in the US, you know how it works, and you work inside the system, and you saw how it works in the system.
Yeah, what do you think the prospects are now for, like Russia, as a result of the special military operation and ensuing sanctions? Was used to buy Boeing aircraft or Airbus, or both?
Before that, we used to build our own airplanes. This is why the sanctions have put us back on track in a situation when we understand, and we are not going to abandon it. We are going to manufacture our own airplanes.
Yeah, and that's so my understanding is in the last couple of months, Russia has tested already, flight tested,
yes.
two new commercial airliners that will, so you no longer have to buy from Boeing or Airbus. And what do you think the prospects are that Russia will sign an agreement with China, and China, with its industrial capability, will start producing these aircraft?
Can you imagine China mass producing these Russian commercial airliners? This is something they can do like this. Can I ask a question to Alexander?
Absolutely.
I think it complements what we're discussing. The Chinese launched the Go West campaign in 1999. Okay, we developed the eastern seaboard. We're starting to develop the center. We need to develop Xinjiang and Tibet. This was quarter of a century ago. Do you see any similarities with President Putin? One of his top priorities is the development of the Far East, Siberia and the Far East. Are they complementary projects? And do you think that President Putin looked at the Chinese model and said, okay, what they did east to west, we can do here from east to west. What they did from west to east, we can do it on the opposite here. Because it's a national project of development, an area in Russia that was neglected so far, right?
Well, I agree with you, but at the same time, not quite. In fact, we are currently developing infrastructure projects in the direction of China. Well, not only China, let's say to the east. But why? Because the West has rejected our resources, but the purpose of the development of Russian economy cannot be overseas oriented. It is a good direction. This is a profitable direction. But the purpose of the Russian economy has to be development of the domestic market, building sovereignty at the expense of the internal resources. Because getting an effect and reclaiming your sovereignty at the expense of external sources is something that no country can do. And because the answer to the question, what sovereignty is, lies in domestically. Development of our own resources, key economic industries and financial resources. And as a consequence, we'll get an opportunity to define our goals and our agenda to achieve our own objectives. This is what sovereignty is about. Therefore, the change of this geographic directions or orientation is not the root cause, but the consequence, because Russia has revised its development concept. What the West fails to understand, yes, of course, we can go back to the West on our own terms and conditions, but this will not be our goal, but the consequence of our development. This is why I'm confident that we've been discussing it with Larry. Sanctions proved to be helpful because they changed, reshaped our mindset, and they gave an answer to the question, who are you? What are you, Russia? You are a sovereign state that is able to actually provide for itself. And this new understanding enabled us to build our economy, policy, and our life in a new way.
The sanctions angle is fundamental, because even under sanctions, Russia has this national project of incorporating the Russian Far East and Siberia to the rest of the Russian economy, which is what the Chinese did 25 years ago, incorporate the West to the Chinese economy. But in terms of sanctions, for instance, when we travel in Iran, and we see what 40 years of sanction does to a country. You arrive in the port in the Caspian, you think that you are in the 1970s.
Right.
Nothing is modern. They have to catch up, of course, because there was no possible investment. But at least Russia, you are already in a much higher stage.
What did the West do? We cannot say that everything is negative. We cannot underestimate the perspective and potential of the West and its strengths. The global system, let's take the financial system. Its dominance is not because dollar is printed in the United States, but all institutions, the majority of institutions worldwide, support the dominance of dollar. It is the International Monetary Fund. It is the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. These are insurance companies. The entire system is built in such a way so that it preserves the reign of dollar. But let's ask this question. Can any country afford to use its own currency? Formally, yes. But realistically, no, because there is IMF, the International Monetary Fund, that has imposed the rules of issuance of currency and the rules of development. Why? We can ask this question, where until now, is gas price defined, oil prices are defined, and commodity prices are defined. Western countries, such as European countries or the United States, have built exchanges where do they produce oil or gas, they resell oil and gas, and they generate a delta. It is an answer to the question that it is a very comfortable form of control. You are producers and we can help you sell your products. But this system will not work. And the countries that have joined BRICS are asking this question. If our share of global GDP is 40%, why do we have to be guided by the prices that are defined elsewhere? And that's it. The West has created a problem for itself by opening the eyes of different countries to the system of relations that has been built. And no one can go back. Everyone understands it now. This is why countries are switching over to using national currencies in settlements. They start declaring the principles, the pricing principles for their products, and they want to build real trading and financial relations built on trust and justice. Where there is justice in trade, in customs restrictions and customs duties. This is the mistake that is made by the West. Well, the West is putting restrictions on itself and is closing down its development prospects.
We touched on this in an earlier conversation we had with respect to Iran, because Iran is now in a new relationship with both Russia and China, and Russia and China together are in a new relationship with Iran. And as you said, Iran has been devastated by 40 years of sanctions. But now I would argue there is a light at the end of the tunnel because of with both Russia and China now saying, no, we're not going to play the sanctions game anymore against Iran. Do you agree that that's a game changer?
That's one of the crucibles of this interlocking strategic relationships, in fact. We're talking about three interlocking strategic relationships, and they add to each other. It's like a very simple image. Russia and China have Iran's back. It's a very simple way of putting, but that's what it is. And this, if there is another 12-day war, this is what's going to be. As much as Iran and the Persians are so proud of what they can do by themselves with no friends whatsoever, but now they have two big friends right behind them. And I'm sure this is part of the consideration, certainly by the Americans, not by the Israelis, but the Americans are considering that now.
Yeah. What do you think?
I think that the problem is that for a long time there were rules defined, not laws, but rules. And those rules were set up by those who were strong and imposed on those who were weak. And their strength was in economic power, in financial power, and military power. But life has changed. And the centers of influence today that have a potential, they also represent a force. And when a force talks to a force, it is a difficult conversation. And it is not a way to find solutions to questions. We need to find different methods of solutions based on respect and taking into account other people's position, and because everyone is equal today. And this situation is much more comfortable, and it attracts much more allies compared to a situation when I'm a strong man and I'm going to impose my rules on you. And this has changed the people's mindset. And to a certain extent, Donald Trump, President Trump, what did he start with? He started with an attempt to limit the influence of the Federal Reserve System. And the second, he became aware that the economy that was 70% consisting of the service sector, because the United States had already given away a real manufacturing to other countries, which means that value was created in one country and it was distributed in another country. But under the previous conditions, it worked. But now the services are not needed, whereas manufacturing is needed. And he wants to bring back the manufacturing, but it's challenging because you need competences, people, technologies, etc. And it is time-consuming. And by the way, the other countries are not a desert. China, Russia, other countries that have actual manufacturing capacity. Look at the automobile industry. China has killed all car maker giants. And you saw the numbers. Do you know how many car brands are made in China? 190. Brands. 190.
Yes,
Can you imagine that? Can someone compete with them? If you look at the quality and the prices of the cars, it is but a small example, because car making is an industry that a limited number of countries can afford, because there is a lot of materials consumed. There are spare parts needed, similar to airplanes, construction, etc. China possesses all that. Can the service sector gain a victory over the manufacturing sector? No. The manufacturing sector is what is underlying the service sector. And the West cannot win by imposing the services. When you have your manufacturing capacity, China and other countries can provide services that will not be inferior, because this is why those countries that have manufacturing production competences will have the future.
Yeah, who's got I'm sure some economist has developed a good measure of, let's call it the level of industrialization of an economy, as opposed to the level of financialization. Because I think your point that the United States gets this reputation of this strong economy, but you understand the term cotton candy? You can have a dinner of cotton candy and all you're going to do is get sick and still be hungry. That's a financialized economy. And I had a conversation 3 weeks ago with Mr. Galushka, who is a big advocate. He comes from the Siberia and from West. He's got the #1 book in Russia on the economy. And he was making the point. He says, look, you can't be a genuine modern economy without an industrial base. And the reality is the United States no longer has an industrial base.
Absolutely.
And that's, I think what we're seeing right now is China and Russia together, they're accelerating so quickly. And the West, it looks to me, the West doesn't even understand it's being left behind.
They don't understand, especially in Europe. Some in America do. In Europe, they are bypassed by history, literally, which is a very sad destiny for the best of European culture of these past centuries. In fact, they had forgotten how to be innovative in Europe because of this atrophied political elite, which is immensely mediocre. And, of course, they are not nationalists in the sense of defending national values in Europe. They look at this artificial EU construct, which doesn't mean anything. And any average European in Italy or in France or in Germany, you ask them, what is the EU? They don't know what it is. And they hate it on top of it.
Well, what do they have? I mean, does Europe have anything that Russia needs?
It's a very good question.
In Europe, there is something that Russians need. First and foremost, the example how not to do things.
How not to do
Yeah, I agree with that.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or watch what they do the opposite.
Or don't do it this way.
Yeah, and that's been my analytical point all along over the last, year and a half. Russia does not need a thing from Europe. There's no natural resources. There's no innovative, cutting-edge technology. Even the wine that Russia's starting to make is as good as what France.
Wine from Crimea is fantastic.
Yeah.
They actually destroyed the beautiful picture that they imposed on the entire world with their own hands. That beautiful image had very hardworking and very efficient German workers. That image had smart and brainy Brits, and everyone was there. I do not want to insult anyone. We respect the history and culture of European nations and their abilities. But if we look at Europe and try to answer the question why today Germany, that used to be so hardworking and uniquely capable, has transformed into modern Germany, then the answer to the question is very simple. Maybe it took them long decades to buy cheap gas from Russia and build that beautiful, and at the expense of that they built an industry that was the locomotive, the engine of European economy. Why today, when they have refused to buy cheap gas, and not only gas, why they have rejected any relations with Russia, they are falling into a precipice? Why? The answer is here. You should not look for it, because they destroyed that image, and it turns out they were exploiting the good relations with the Soviet Union and Russia. Now there are no such relations, and they're now facing the good relationship with the United States. And here you see the result.
Well, let's, speaking of committing economic suicide, let's close out with a brief discussion about Venezuela and the United States seemingly trying to commit a form of suicide there as well. How far, some fear that there might possibly be Russia intervening on the side of Venezuela. How likely do you think that is?
Well, we have a legal treaty with Venezuela, and I think that it is an important factor, that treaty, but the principal factor lies within Venezuela, because it is a country where people trust their leadership. And it is sufficient to visit that country to see that the attitude to the leadership is quite sincere, that the leadership is working to ensure the independence and sovereignty of their country. The West, and in this particular case, the United States, is counting that this link, this connection between the people and the leadership can be destroyed due to problems with availability of food, healthcare, etc. But people who love their country can easily suffer and survive temporary difficulties. And this strengthens the consolidation around their leadership. And the fear of America, the fear of Americans of invading Venezuela and human life losses is something that stops them short. Therefore, putting the stakes on bourgeoisie and on the fact that on alleged lack of readiness to protect their country, that does not not work with Venezuela. By the way, will Frenchmen go and defend the European Union? The European Union is nothing but a bureaucratic substructure. Let's hope that they will defend their own country, like Germany or French. And people need to love and respect their history and their country, and it has to be developed. You cannot sell it. The fact that there are warships blocking Venezuela is something that strengthens, that consolidates Venezuelan people, and a simple blockade cannot be a solution. And given that this acquires given that more and more countries are supporting Venezuelans, I think that Americans would be afraid to use force. They will hope that they will be able to buy Venezuelans, but not everything is for sale.
Well,
Yeah, a white coup or a color revolution or buying a color revolution.
what do you think will be the reaction, if the U.S. moves ahead with military action? I don't think they will.
They won't, Larry. Yeah.
But if they did, what would be the reactions of Brazil and Colombia?
It pains me to say they won't do anything. South America is too divided. The opposition inside Brazil. Brazil is a one-trick pony. It's Lula and nothing else. He's isolated against. It's horrible to say that, but there's nobody else apart from him. If he disappears, the country falls in the lap of the U.S., just like Argentina that disappeared as a neocolony only a few days ago. And Colombia is complicated, even though Petro, he says the right words, but he would not go as far as to go on a frontal clash against the empire. So Venezuela will be on its own, only helped by Russia. But that's tricky because this is something we could ask Alexander. Russia has a strategic partnership with Iran, and Russia has a strategic partnership with Venezuela. If Venezuela is attacked like Iran was, would Russia intervene?
Ну, есть разные просто статьи в этих соглашениях.
There are different articles in the treaty. Speaking about Iran, we have a strategic partnership, but in military terms, there are certain provisions and certain clauses. But we understand that it does not boil down to specific articles of a treaty. We need to understand that the voice that is heard at the diplomatic level, even at the level of ordinary citizens, is heard stronger and stronger. It is not that easy for everyone else to imagine why such intervention will be needed. The American leadership cannot explain to its own people why they need to intervene. And it is also a problem that has to be taken into account. I think that if there is, the more openness there is, the fewer chances will be for any direct military intervention. And this is extremely important to us to preserve peace in the region, because it is relevant to each and all, and it affects the United States even the United States.
If the U.S. goes forward with this, and we'll close out with this, it could actually be maybe sort of the final turning point to recognize that the UN Security Council is no longer useful.
No longer useful.
And that there needs to be a change, that the countries like India need to be represented, Brazil need to be represented in something like the UN Security, in a new Security Council, because the existing one's a failure.
И другие условия взаимоотношения стран. Более того,
Yes, a change in the relationship between countries. And I think that there is no one who can forecast the consequences of such a conflict with Venezuela, because there might be very unexpected aspects of that standoff with the United States. And I think it would be a huge mistake, and the United States could be misled if they think that such a local military operation would not have any consequences for many countries and for the global situation as a whole. Therefore, politicians' responsibility should be such that they should take a broader view rather than a local view. And they need to be responsible not only for the destiny of their own people, but for other peoples as well. I think and I hope that the incumbent leadership of the United States will have enough common sense not to commit stupid things.
Let's hope. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Pepe, always
Thank
a
you
delight.
so much.
Alexander, thank you.
Alexander.
This has been Countercurrents. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like and subscribe button. We'll continue to build the number of viewers. Thanks for watching.